It was 2 in the morning when the tow truck backed into my driveway, orange strobes flickering against the pines, and the woman in the silk robe pointed like a queen naming her next execution. I stood there barefoot on the cold concrete, watching my work truck crawl away, and something inside me snapped into focus. She thought she had me cornered, but she didn't know I owned the ground under her front bumper. My name's Mason Cole. I lay tile, build decks, do those small jobs that make a house feel like home, hinges that line up, doors that swing true. I've lived in Cedar Gate my whole life, long before this place got polished into a brochure, back when folks waved because they knew your dad, not because the HOA newsletter told them to. I'm not a crusader. I like quiet, coffee, and starting the day before the sun runs its mouth. But if you push a man long enough, you find out what he's made of and maybe what his land is, too. The pushing started soft. A note tucked under my wiper about commercial vehicles diminishing curb appeal. Then a woman at the mailbox, perfect hair at 7 a.m., saying, "Mr. Cole, Cedar Gate has standards." She said standards the way some people say scripture. Her name was Deirdre Lang, Realtor, HOA president, and if gossip has a backbone, she was it. I nodded, said I'd look into it, then watched her take photos of my truck like it was a crime scene. After that came the anonymous complaints noise calls when I opened my garage at 6 to load a saw, code enforcement peeking over my fence because my lumber stack looked industrial, a petition circulating with glossy pictures, and a title that made me laugh, "Protecting Our Serenity." The pictures were my house, my tools, my truck with the ladder rack. I kept my head down and showed up to the town council meeting anyway, wearing a clean shirt and the boots I got married in. People I've known since grade school took the podium and said I fixed their steps after a fall, that I plowed their drive the winter the schools closed. When the council voted 5-0 to deny the petition, Deirdre stared at me like I'd just run a mower through her rose bed. In the lobby she said, "Mason, it isn't personal. But maybe this isn't the neighborhood for what you do." I said, "Deirdre, this neighborhood is exactly where I do what I do," and walked out before my temper showed. In the weeks after, things sharpened. I'd find new nails glittering in the gutter where my tires kissed the curb. Facebook posts from burner accounts said I ran an unlicensed business, false, but sticky all the same. A man in a polo stood across from my house writing down license plates of the folks who hired me, and when I walked over, he folded his little notebook and left like a crab into tall grass. That's when the cameras went up, not to make a statement, just to keep receipts. Tow night caught everything. Deirdre in a robe and slippers, measuring my bumper against the street with a contractor's tape like she'd just learned the word easement. 2 hours later, I was standing in a fluorescent office signing paperwork to get my truck out of impound, stomach burning like bad coffee. I called my buddy, Ben Park, good lawyer, better listener, and told him the whole thing, start to finish. He didn't say much, just hummed when I got to the tow, asked a few questions that made me slow down, and finally said, "Mason, do you remember when Cedar Gate switched developers back in the 90s? The bankruptcy?" I did. My dad and I were pouring a small slab for the sales office when the original builder disappeared and the whole project sat like a half-finished thought. Ben said, "There are funny seams in land when people quit halfway." He sent me to a title office on the edge of town, the kind of place that still smells like paper and ink and stubbornness, where a woman named Talia Brooks pulled a book off a shelf and flattened it with her forearms like a baker. We spent 3 hours with old maps, highlighters, and the humming of a copier that had seen more winters than some of the new neighbors. There it was, Larkspur Lane, the road that runs past my house, the one that curves toward Deirdre's glass front palace and ends in a cul-de-sac that looks like a magazine ad. Only it wasn't conveyed to the HOA. The original developer intended to dedicate it as public, but the paperwork stalled when the bankruptcy hit. Then the second developer carved out the cul-de-sac for temporary access, and a county clerk stamped a note that read like a shrug. Talia circled a paragraph and tapped it with the back of her pen. If nobody accepted this, Mason, the residue stayed with the adjoining parcel. "That's your parcel." She said residue like it was a secret flavor in a recipe, a thing only a few people taste on purpose. I drove home with copies in a manila folder and a new calm in my chest that felt like a plan leaning forward. Ben filed a quiet title action to clear any fog on the boundary and a petition to recognize Larkspur as a private road with public access, no change for the mailman or the school bus, but a very big change for whoever thought they could wave a tape measure in my driveway at 2 in the morning. We ordered a new survey and placed little flag stakes along the edge where the road kisses the grass. I went about my work. No chest thumping, no Facebook posts, just building fences, rehanging doors, and waiting while the process turned like a millstone. Deirdre noticed the flags within a day. She walked the line with one of her HOA board members in tow, a man who wore his golf cap like a uniform. She didn't touch the stakes that would have been too obvious, but she smiled at my camera up in the eaves and said, loud enough to carry, "Temporary art installation, I suppose." I smiled back and returned to recalibrating my miter's saw, listening to the steady thrum of a town, finding out a rule it didn't know it lived under. A week later, she sent an emissary, no other word for it. A younger agent with shiny shoes showed up on my porch with a cash offer to buy my house at 10% over market if I'd be willing to relocate within 60 days for the good of the community. He didn't look past me into the living room with my wife's photo on the mantle, just recited numbers like he was reading a weather report. I said, "Tell Deirdre I'm not selling, and tell your boss the good of the community means knowing where the property lines are." He flinched when I said her name. I didn't say who. You didn't have to. He left, and 3 nights later the word "move" was spray painted across my garage door and stop sign red. The camera caught a figure in a hoodie, short, quick stride, right foot turning in. The police came, took the footage, filed the report, and shrugged at me with exhausted eyes. "Hard to charge on gate alone," one said. I understood. I scrubbed the paint off with solvent while Mr. Ortiz from 3 houses down held a shop light and told me about the winter of '98 when the pipes burst and the whole street pitched in. "People forget," he said, not unkind. Then something reminds them. The reminder arrived on a Tuesday evening in a room that smelled like varnish and coffee at Town Hall, with its flags and framed photos, and that old clock that adds 5 minutes to any argument. The agenda had plenty on it: speed humps, a variance for a backyard studio, but when they called the item about Larkspur Lane, every seat was full. Deirdre brought a clutch of neighbors, all coordinated pearls, blue blazers, practiced faces. Ben sat beside me flipping through the packet survey, chain of title, photographs of those little red flags marching along the edge like toy soldiers. When the city attorney summarized the history in plain terms: developer bankruptcy, incomplete dedication, residue remaining with my lot, you could feel the air shift. Not a gasp, just a recalibration, a sound like a crowd leaning back. They opened the floor. Deirdre went first. Off course she did. "I'm not a lawyer," she began, which is what people say right before they try to lawyer the room. But the intent was always that our roads be communal, and frankly, Mr. Cole's occupation has been incompatible with Cedar Gate's upward trajectory. She smiled as if she'd just complimented me. "We simply can't have what, Deirdre?" I asked, not into the mic, just into the air. "Contracts. Or contractors." A laugh bubbled in a corner of the room and died, polite. Ben asked to play a short video, a timeline we'd cut together with dates stamped like receipts. It showed the tone night, Deirdre's midnight measuring, the emissary with the shiny shoes, the spray paint, the nail strips glittering. It showed Mr. Ortiz bringing me a shop light and Talia underlining lines in a ledger. It didn't accuse, it demonstrated. And when it ended with the surveyor's voice describing the markers and the boundaries, and the city attorney nodded along, something happened I hadn't expected. A woman who'd signed the petition stood to say she felt misled. "I was told this was about safety," she said, twisting her wedding band. "And now it feels like it was about forcing a sale." A husband put a hand on her shoulder, embarrassed or proud, I couldn't tell. Deirdre's composure cracked like sugar candy dipped in water. "Are we going to let one man hold a road hostage?" she said, voice sharp, "because he can't keep his business out of his garage?" I leaned into the mic, kept my tone even. "Ma'am, I fix steps so grandmothers don't fall. I build ramps so folks can get in their front doors. My business is this neighborhood, and the law says this stretch of asphalt is mine. Not to block, not to gloat, just to manage. Like a grown-up." The room didn't cheer. It's a town hall. Not a pep rally, but you could feel 20 hearts decide they were tired of being her audience. The council voted 5-0, again, to recognize the private road with a public easement, mailman and school bus unchanged, emergency vehicles welcome, but no more harassment dressed as governance. The city attorney added a recommendation that the HOA amend its guidelines to reflect the actual map that exists, not the brochure. The gavel fell. You'd think that would be the end. It wasn't. The settlement came after Ben filed a civil action that read like a diary of small cruelties: the tow, the false claims, the property damage. It wasn't a fortune. I didn't want one. We settled for damages, fees, and something better than money, an agreement that in any listing she touched in Cedar Gate, Deirdre would disclose the road status and the boundary markers, and a no-contact clause that kept my mornings quiet. She resigned from the HOA before they voted her out. The younger agent left her team. She sold fewer houses that year, and the ones she did sell didn't whisper my name like a problem to be solved. I kept working. Talia came to the block party we held on Larkspur in early fall, hot dogs on the new griddle, kids chalking suns and hopscotch grids across my private asphalt. Mr. Ortiz brought a folding chair and told the same story about '98, and I didn't mind hearing it again. Ben showed up late, tie still on, and we left the road open because it isn't a moat, it's a street, and streets are for getting somewhere. We set up a Know Your Deeds night at the library, and I started a scholarship in my wife's name for kids going into the trades. $800 doesn't change a life, but it buys tools that don't quit on you the first time a screw goes crooked. Sometimes, when I'm up before dawn and the air's as thin as a whisper, I think about the first time Deirdre said the word standards to me, and how she thought the world was a stage where she arranged props: quiet, curb appeal, an approved truck in an approved driveway. I don't hate her. People who sell pictures for a living sometimes forget the frame ain't the truth. She mistook control for community. We all do sometimes. But somewhere between that tow truck and that gavel, this neighborhood remembered its spine, and so did I. A month after the settlement, a letter appeared in my mailbox: no return address, handwriting neat as a blueprint. I was part of it, it said. I didn't spray your door, but I looked away when people did. I'm sorry. There was no name, just a neighbor. I didn't need one. Forgiveness isn't a speech. It's not even a decision, it's a practice, like sanding an edge until it doesn't snag your sleeve anymore. I wrote back, come by for coffee. The fence still needs a second coat. Now, if you're watching this and you've dealt with a board that thinks it's a badge, or a neighbor who builds their status on someone else's back, hear me. Document everything: dates, times, conversations. Learn your easements, your surveys, your plats, boring words that can save you. Don't let anger drive your truck. Let process do the heavy lifting. And when you win, because sometimes the truth actually does line up, don't salt the earth, plant something. Even if it's just a good story and a better boundary stake. That night with the tow truck, I felt humiliated, small, like the ground could be taken from under me if someone in a robe and slippers said it should. Turned out the ground was exactly what saved me. Not because it made me rich or powerful, but because it reminded me this place wasn't about optics or envy. It was about lines honestly drawn and neighbors who knew the difference between a community and a club. So tell me, what would you have done if you were me? Standing barefoot at 2 in the morning watching your truck ride off under the rules someone made up as they went along? Would you have sold for the quick cash and quiet, or fought on principle knowing you'd still see these people at the mailbox? Drop your take in the comments. Who was right? Who was wrong? What does community even mean where you live? And if you've ever tangled with a board or a neighbor with more ambition than empathy, share your story. Let's put some light on the gray areas, because the more we talk about it, the harder it is for anyone to rewrite the map while we're sleeping.